Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to Mirror Now. I'm Ritangshu Bhattacharya. Today's headline has been one that we have all been anticipating, preparing for, even perhaps dreading for weeks now. In fact, it's been almost 2 months. The dreaded T word has finally hit, and it has a number associated with it, 26%. That's the percentage of reciprocal tariffs that has been imposed on India by the United States under Donald Trump. So every Indian item, barring a few exceptions, whether it be an automobile product, whether it be an electronic good, whether it be even a garment, any Indian product that will be sold in the United States will be taxed 26% more. So the headline figure is concerning. After all, India exports about $80 billion in goods to America. And imposing a tariff of 26% on that will impact the Indian economy by as much as $31 billion. But is it really doom and gloom? The government says no, it's not an obvious setback. To use their words, it's a mixed bag. So then, to quote the Prime Minister on one of his favorite words, is there scope for converting this APTA into Afsar? Tonight, we are going to go beyond all the tizzy and the tussle over tariffs and really look at what it means for you, the viewer. Because the reality is that even if you don't understand what tariffs really are, and you're not the only one, a lot of people still don't get what tariffs are and are still trying to wrap their heads around them, you will still be impacted by them. And that's where we come in tonight. I'm Ritangshu Bhattacharya. You're watching Beyond the Headline. First, a look at the other top stories. The Waqf Amendment Bill sailed through the Lok Sabha late last night, but now faces a sterner numbers test in the Rajya Sabha, while BJP leader JP Nadda claims the bill may regulate the board's functioning and strengthen India's future. Opposition parties argue that it's arbitrary, unconstitutional, and merely a distraction from the tariff issued by the United States and other pressing issues. It's the fallout of the JDO of supporting Waqf Amendment Bill. Senior JDO leader Mohammad Qasim Ansari resigns from all party posts and positions, claims that the Waqf Bill is against the principle of Muslims and Nitish Kumar has betrayed them. Court after court delivers a crushing blow to the Telangana government's plans to deforest the green belt near Hyderabad University. Supreme Court even threatens to get the Chief Secretary locked up if the government resists. Celebrations erupt in Hyderabad University as the brakes are finally put on bulldozers. In a major setback for the Bengal government, the Supreme Court upholds the Calcutta High Court's order cancelling the recruitment of 25,000 teachers. Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee accepts the verdict but claims that the court order was part of a conspiracy by the BJP and the left. In a move to enhance transparency in the judiciary, all 33 Supreme Court judges agreed to publicly disclose their assets. A resolution adopted on the 1st of April now mandates that judges submit their asset details to the Chief Justice, who will then ensure they're uploaded on the Supreme Court's website. From Mumbai to Pune, Maharashtra, Navnirman Sena workers unleashed a rampage over Marathi, slapping and assaulting bankers, a security guard, and a store employee for not speaking the language. Party Chief Raj Thackeray doubles down on Thappad politics, declares that anyone living in the state must speak Marathi. So the big headline today has been stock markets sinking, global markets feeling the tremors. The trigger, this man. A fresh wave of sweeping US tariffs which has been brought in by him. How will households and businesses absorb the shock? Is this just market jitters or the start of something deeper? The global tension is spilling into Indian politics as well. In Parliament, leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, Rahul Gandhi, accused the government of bowing its head before foreign powers, saying that it was part of BJP's history and culture. Listen to what Rahul Gandhi said.
Somebody once asked Indira Gandhi ji, in the matter of foreign policy, do you lean left or do you lean right? And Indira Gandhi ji answered, I don't lean left or right, I stand straight. I'm Indian and I stand straight. And the BJP and the RSS have a different philosophy. When asked, do you lean left or do you lean right? They say, no, we bow our head right in front of every foreigner that comes in front of us. Sir, this is something that is in their culture, it is in their history, we know that. What are you going to do about this tariff that our ally has imposed on us?
See, here's what retaliatory tariffs could actually mean for India. Medium and small enterprises may feel the pinch. The rupee could face more pressure. Labor-intensive sectors are left exposed. Markets are expected to react with caution. And India's chip incentive scheme may get a breather. What is staying outside the tariff net for now includes copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, lumber, gold, energy, and a few critical minerals. That's significant for India's export mix. Let's talk numbers now. India faces a 26% average tariff. That sounds a lot, but that's a lot lower than China, which has got 34%, Vietnam and Indonesia that have got 32% each, Bangladesh that has got 37%, and Sri Lanka at 44%. So relatively speaking, compared to its neighbors and other countries in the South Asia, Southeast Asia region, India is better placed. So what opportunities does this create? In terms of textiles and garments, higher tariffs in China and Bangladesh could make Indian products more competitive. In electronics and smartphones, India could step up as an alternative to Vietnam and Thailand. In semiconductors, keep in mind, in semiconductors, tariffs on Taiwan may push global players to diversify and India could benefit. Keep in mind that all semiconductors, all electronic items are mostly made in China, Japan, or Thailand. In machinery, toys, and auto components, tariffs in China and Thailand will open up space for India to position itself as a trusted source. But seizing this moment will require action. What action are we talking about? Number one, India must scale up its production capacity. It needs to move from just assembling to real value addition. The ease of doing business must improve. Labor laws and compliance need reform, and infrastructure and logistics must be modernized. These steps could reduce costs and make India a more reliable partner when it comes to global supply chains. So the big question is this moment of global uncertainty also a strategic opening for India? Keep in mind, that's what the government says, that it's not a setback, it's a mixed bag. So how should policymakers, manufacturers, and exporters and the government itself respond? Let's put that across to my panel of guests. So joining me, we have Dr. Sudhir Mehta, Chairman and MD of Pinnacle Industries. We have PK Basu, one of India's topmost independent economists. We have Pathikrit Pen, noted geopolitical analyst. And we have Vikram Limsay, business and policy strategist. Thank you all for joining me at this point here. Let me start with you, Mr. Basu. Do you see, the famous words from the Commerce Ministry that have been echoing through the day today is that it's not a setback. This 26% figure is a mixed bag. Would you agree with that assessment? And if so, what are the reasons to be optimistic amidst all this doom and gloom?
The main reason to be optimistic is that the tariff rate that India faces, 26%, is a lot lower than what China faces. You said 34%, but there was already a 20% tariff on all imports from China. So the effective rate for China now is 54%. You also said 32% for Vietnam. It's actually 46%. You look at the list put out by Trump, it says 46% for Vietnam. So in terms of textiles and garments, our main competitors are China, Vietnam, Bangladesh. They are all paying substantially higher tariffs in the US market now onwards. If you look at places like Bangladesh and Cambodia, as well as Vietnam, they had GSP benefits, Generalized System of Preferences, which basically meant near zero tariffs. They are now going from that zero number to an incredibly high number. So India's textile garments, particularly, have been pretty stagnant for the past decade in terms of export growth. They will see a very substantial benefit. In fact, over the past year, textile and garment exports from India have picked up for the world. And now in the US market, India has been handed a huge positive benefit. In addition, things like electronic components, where we've seen a huge surge of export growth from India over the last 6 years, especially the last 3 years. That is going to get an additional boost because the key competitors, as you mentioned correctly, China, Vietnam, Thailand, are going to see much higher tariffs in the US market than India will face. So I also think that these tariffs are a negotiating ploy. India is in the process of negotiating a mutual reduction in tariffs, which will probably require India to cut its tariffs a bit more than the US cuts, because India exports about twice what it exports to the US relative to what it imports from the US. So, in China's case, the ratio is 3:1. So, India is a friend of the US. The US is a friend of India's, and there is a mutually beneficial negotiation that is underway, which will probably result in a lowering of tariffs by both parties. But relative to some of our key competitors in key products that we export, India is very well positioned to gain substantial market share. So if I look at India's market share of the US at the moment, it's 2.8% for total goods imports. I would expect that by the end of next year, that share will probably be closer to 4%. If you look at China's share, before 2018, China's share of US imports was 22%. It is now down to 13%. It'll probably come down to about 8 or 9% within the next 3 years. So that will create room for others to take some of that share, and India will be a big beneficiary. Now, in the past, what China has done is, when steel tariffs were imposed, a lot of Chinese steel appeared in the US market with a made in Vietnam label. That door too is now shut. So I think, people are talking about a recession in the US. The really important impact is going to be on China. China has huge overcapacity in every industry, and it will now not be able to dump that overcapacity in the US. What we need to guard against is potential dumping by China into our market, which is ongoing. So in things like steel and aluminium.
Okay, I'll come to that, Mr. Basu. That is a very important. That is a very important. There's a very important, perhaps a trigger or warning that we need to look out for. But you have made a very succinct glass half full assessment in terms of why we are better off than immediate competitors in the region. For the sake of objectivity, let me bring in the glass half empty side of it also. Let me bring Vikram Limsay into the conversation as well. So, the fact is that yes, while the tariffs on us are much lower than our competitors in the South Asian and the Southeast Asian region, they're still higher than perhaps some of the competitors in the European Union or Canada, for instance. The other aspect is, and I'll break it down into simpler language so even our viewers who don't necessarily understand business and tariff understand. If what we're looking at is because it's going to be so much more expensive for the United States to get made in China iPhones, so they will have more manufacturing of iPhones in India. At the end of the day, Trump is doing this to try and increase manufacturing in the United States, not move it from a China or a Vietnam to India. So there's a chance, there's every chance that once he realizes that this move is backfiring and his products are and the United States is still dependent on imports, he may course correct and increase and bring us at par with the other countries in the region to try and ensure that ultimately manufacturing is done in the United States.
Yeah, I think the intention of Trump's entire exercise on this so-called Liberation Day is to get the manufacturing and industry back into the United States, but that's better said than done, because you see, tariff is more a tactical aspect when it comes to global trade. When it comes to manufacturing, there are other elements which are involved. One of the biggest elements which is involved is the currency. Now, let's not forget that US has had a currency hegemony for the last 30, 40, 50 years. So right now, they've got two sticks to beat the entire world. One is through tariffs, and other is through the currency hegemony. So, if they have to really look at getting manufacturing back, they have to do something about the currency. Now, what happens is specifically the United States and most of the Western world, their currencies at this point of time do not reflect the actual strength of their economy. And they're basically overinflated. If I were to put it in a simple word, today, what is the biggest export of the United States? I mean, the biggest exports of the United States is inflation, and the biggest export of China is capacity. So it's a war between capacity and inflation. And that's where it's all moving towards. The other thing is, it seems very counterintuitive to me today because the entire trading relationships across the world is moving from blocks to bilateral. So in that context today, to paint the entire world with one brush of tariff, somebody with 25, somebody with 40, somebody with 60, sounds a little counterintuitive. Perhaps what should have been done is a more deliberate attempt of country to country specific things should have been taken. This seems like a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction. I really don't think it's going to get manufacturing back inside the United States if that is the much touted reason for doing this entire exercise. That's not coming in a hurry because tariffs are, like I said, tactical global trading initiative. They don't kind of impact too much on the manufacturing. The currency impacts much more. And it's an overinflated dollar till the time they don't do something about their dollar. But then, to tweak tariffs is one thing. You can probably, browbeat because of your geopolitical strengths, other countries to fall in line with reference to tariffs. But when it comes to tweaking your currency, there's a lot of domestic polity which is involved. I don't know whether not this president, any president today in the United States has the guts to actually tweak the currency, because then it's a matter of inflation, rising prices of essentials, whether the domestic constituency will like him or not. After all, he has to look at and play that game as well. So to answer your specific question, whether he's done it with a good intention of course, getting manufacturing back, whether it will have the desired results, I don't think so, because they've been exporting inflation all over the world, and like China has been exporting capacity.
So you're saying that the overall objective of Trump trying to bully countries and companies into So you're saying that the overall objective of Trump trying to bully countries into manufacturing and companies into manufacturing more than the United States will not hit its mark, and what it will do is strategically shift manufacturing industries from our competitors in East and Southeast Asia back to India. Let's bring in the geopolitical aspect about it, particularly since both Mr. Basu and Mr. Limsay have also alluded to it. Coming here. Firstly, were you expecting the percentage that has been levied, given the fact that in the last 2 months, the Indian administration under Prime Minister Modi had quite maturely not reacted to the baits which were coming in from the Donald Trump administration, and had actually reacted with a lot of confidence-building measures in terms of lowering its own tariffs? Keeping that in mind, were you surprised with the 26% figure? And more importantly, do you feel, as Mr. Basu said, that this will be a precursor for one-to-one free trade agreements being linked out, and the incentive for India to link these agreements with the United States so that the tariffs come down further?
So the 26% figure is a knee-jerk reaction because for more than 75 to 80% of the commodities that India imports from the United States, the tariff rate is just around 10% or less than that. See, the reason that government of India is not very much concerned, let me tell you this. India is not an export-oriented US-dependent economy. For a $4.3 trillion economy, our entire export to United States is around $80 billion. You mentioned the impact would be on $31 billion to $32 billion, certain sectors. That comes to 0.7% of the GDP. At $80 billion exports, it comes to less than 2% of the GDP, which means it would impact us. But it doesn't mean that it would have a devastating consequence for the economy. We are a far more resilient economy to absorb. Now, what is going to happen is this. Yes, it might be a negotiating tool, but that doesn't mean that India would open up its dairy sector or poultry sector or fisheries or agriculture sector. That is not going to happen. Let me tell you 3-4 things that can happen. And I must thank Vikramji for mentioning about the dollar. Let me tell you one thing. There will be realignment of the supply chains. There will be realignment of the trade dynamics. You see, the head of European Union came to India. It's not just for the courtesy visit. It's about realignment of the trade. Today, US does not have the preeminence and the prominence in trade as it used to have. There are countries which are trading in non-dollar dynamics and with countries independent of United States. So in a way, United States is pushing countries like India to have more trade within the BRICS, within BIMSTEC, and within other alignments. Now, that is something that United States is compelling. You cannot have a situation like this and then push that you have to continue with dollar as a trading currency. The other thing that we must understand, is this, that the entire edifice of the American economy is based on dollar as a currency through which they would conveniently import. They cannot create a situation where manufacturing will come back to United States just by giving threats of tariff and then export, presume the whole world will import from United States. It will not happen. You cannot simply make Coca-Cola in United States and export to India. The cost dynamics simply will not add up. So to put it bluntly, I think it is a great opportunity for India to create better supply chains. There will be certain areas where we would be impacted.
Okay.
It would have certain shocks, but the shocks are manageable because, as I mentioned, the impact will be on less than 1% of the economy of $4.3 trillion. And that is why the resilience of the internal economy is so very important. You know, Ritangshu, we must understand, we must not go gung-ho about the price arbitrage that we have because the Bangladeshis have more tariff. Eventually, you have to go up the value chain and create brands where people will buy not because it is less costly, but because it is of premium quality. That is the value chain upgradation that India requires, and India eventually is going towards that. Yes, it is true, there will be certain challenges, but if Trump is presuming, and I must mention, United States is a strategic partner, it is a great and a very important trading partner, but if it is a ploy to push India for opening up more of the sectors, I mean, a dairy, poultry sector, 10 crore Indian farmers are involved. Are we going to open it up just to make Trump happy? Certainly, it's not going to happen. And last but not the least, even before these tariffs were, imposed, US has been and is one of the most protected economies. We must not forget that. So the presumption that they can use the military and the economic aspect to, push countries to the table and negotiate at their terms, I think in some way, United States has lost that edge. And today, I think if you look at the American reactions, even there's a joint resolution in the Senate, they're defensive about it. They're not even themselves sure as to how it would impact. Do you think tomorrow the entire supply chain is going to back to United States just because of the tariff? I don't think so. So yes, for India, it is a great opportunity like 2020 because of the COVID, that we will realize it is far more important to look for the internal economy to make it far more resilient. And I must thank Prime Minister Modi for the efforts that he made to increase the purchasing power of rural India. One of the key reasons because of which India's economy leapfrogged from $2 trillion to $4 trillion economy. And Ritangshu, don't ignore the possibility of many countries going for devaluation of their own currencies for the sake of absorbing the shock and continuing to export to United States. Back to you.
All right. So the consensus so far has been that there are a lot of opportunities coming in from this point. But you mentioned, Pathikrit, I mean, you don't believe that the poultry and the dairy industry will be opened up even under the threat of tariffs. One industry which is facing a lot of speculation is the automobile industry. Dr. Sudhir Mehta, come in at this point. The one word which Trump had been fixated on for years was the Harley-Davidson and about how India has a brutal tariff on exports of Harley-Davidson bikes. And right before the Prime Minister visited the United States, that was cut down. And that was followed by the news of Elon Musk's opening up Tesla in India. And the rumors are that you can have a Tesla for as little as 20 lakhs or 20 to 30 lakhs going forward. The question is, does that not impact, for instance, our own homegrown EV manufacturers like Tata and Mahindra, which is precisely why tariffs were there in the first place? Do you anticipate, especially in the automobile sector and the other sectors which are seen as the most vulnerable after this tariff percentage, do you see the possibility of American brands probably cannibalizing our Indian products and impacting Indian companies in these sectors?
So good evening. The answer is no. I don't see this having a major disruption. Today, first of all, was not just about India. Let's step back a minute and go back to why the US is doing it. I think very important to put that in context. US has a trade deficit of about $750 billion a year. It accounts for about 1/3 of world household expenditure. What they were doing was simply unsustainable. And at some point, they had to make a change. Now, they have used what is called shock and awe to be able to do this. I would not take today's declaration as a declaration that these tariffs are here to stay. Let's for a minute look at the formula that they adapted, which is very interesting. They simply took the trade deficit of each country and divided that by the imports from that country, and divided that by 2. And that was the calculation which came out for the number that we see today. So clearly, this is not the end game. Today was the start of where the US has kind of put down and said, this is the starting point for negotiation. First and foremost, companies don't change strategies just for one day and are unlikely to do that even in the next few weeks or few months. Till the dust settles on this, there is a lot to be said, but I don't think any major trade long-term changes will happen in weeks or months. It will happen over a period of time. Secondly, coming to your specific question on the Indian auto industry, the Indian auto industry is a very resilient industry. The products which are sold in India, the price points, the homologation standards are different. Yes, if the duties are reduced, you will get some percentage of vehicles which will come into India, probably more than what they're coming in today. But if you look at an overall perspective, I don't think it's going to be any significant number. What actually will also get benefited is our Indian auto component industry. If more manufacturing comes back to the US, which is the objective of this, and I think one of the things which is less understood is that a lot of auto manufacturing moved from the US overseas, and there is a lot of spare capacity lying in US plants. If you see the data in the US, is about 60% of the capacities unused in the US, which means short to midterm, what probably President Trump is banking on is the fact that many of these plants which had shut down in the last couple of years will get restarted. If and when they get restarted, the chances are that India will play a very major role as far as component supply to the US is concerned. So from India's point of view, I would not be overtly concerned. I think this is a wait and watch game. India has very correctly decided not to retaliate. Ultimately, every country has a right to put its own tariffs. US is doing US first, India is doing India first. This is going to take some time to settle down, but personally, I don't think this is going to be any big negative for India. On the other hand, when things settle down, there are many areas that India has to do. And you must also remember that when the trade deficit with India is taken into account, this is only for manufactured goods. It's not for services. So the US has a huge stake in India. Okay. The Googles of the world and the Facebooks of the world have a huge business coming out of India. And this is actually a big positive for India, for the US. And if you factor that in, then the true trade deficit between the US and India is much less than what it is portrayed to be. So to my mind, the real focus of these discussions is not India, it's some of the other countries. And I think India will probably wisely wait. They will see the first few trade deals get settled, which is likely to happen in the coming weeks or months. Some countries will end up with one-to-one treaties with the US. And once the nature of this is understood, then I think India will probably move and some kind of a trade agreement. Already the Commerce Department has put out a message today, which doesn't say a whole lot. And I think that's very deliberate, because the idea is to wait and watch and kind of keep quiet. And I don't think we should be the first to either blink or to negotiate. Let this play out over the coming days or weeks. Nothing will happen in a week's time, except that India's ratings, on a lighter note, in the ease of doing business in the world will now improve. Because either earlier, we used to be the only people who would stay up at midnight waiting for the budget and then recalculate all our taxes. I think this was the first time everybody was waiting in the US and trying to recalculate, and all computer systems around the world have gone haywire because now they're trying to calculate all of these new tariffs. So hopefully our ease of doing business for India will be much higher next year as a result.
Well, wait and watch. Well, wait and watch has been the mantra so far, and I think we can all agree so far that the response of the Indian government so far, by not reacting to the obvious bait in the form of the way the European Union or Canada or some of the Far Eastern countries reacted, it seems, is bearing fruit based on the unanimous response I've got from the opening comments. Now, in the next phase of this discussion, I'm going to focus on what many people are calling is the devil in the detail, and this is clause 4, in which it says that should any trading partner take significant steps to remedy non-reciprocal trade arrangements and align sufficiently with America, the United States may modify the order to decrease duties. So it's a very clear carrot and stick being put out by the United States. Let me start with PK Basu. Mr. Basu, what are these significant steps do you feel that will be safe for India to do in order to incentivize the United States to reduce tariffs? Or do you feel that is not something we should look forward? We've already given them enough. Let's play with what they've given us.
Well, they've imposed a 26% tariff. And so, the differential over what everybody has to pay, everybody is paying a minimum tariff of 10%. So that is a change from the past. In the past, the effective tariff on manufactured imports into the US was just over 2%. Now that is going to be 10%. So on top of that, India is paying a further 16%. And there is scope to reduce that. But basically, India will have to create a situation where India imports a lot more US products. Now, the US probably has a list of items on which it wants India's tariffs to come down or non-tariff barriers. I think it's important to understand that a lot of countries have non-tariff barriers. The US is looking at GST and VAT, etc., as also forms of non-tariff barriers. They're looking at things like the subsidies on rice and wheat as forms of trade barriers. So, there's a 700% import duty on rice in Japan, for instance. In India, there's no such thing, but we have substantial food subsidies, rice and wheat subsidies. And rice is a matter of particular concern to the US because rice is something that the US is a significant exporter of. India is by far the world's biggest exporter of rice. The US claims that India is able to export so much rice because we subsidize rice farmers. So it is going to be, the negotiation is already underway, and India will have to choose which areas we can give ground to the US on. Motorcycles, we can probably give ground on. On automobiles, we can give ground on. But, Ford and GM are not particularly competitive in any market in the world at the moment. So there's a long way before they become competitive. So what the US can really do with automobiles is to basically start at least some reshoring, start opening up some of the factories, etc., with that 25% import duty on all non-farm automobiles that they've now imposed. So I agree that India will benefit if Ford and GM begin to boost capacity and production. They will need auto components. India does not export too many fully built up automobiles to the US, but it's a huge producer and exporter of auto components, and auto components will be benefited if the US economy strengthens and US manufacturing does better. Now, it's also important to assess whether the US economy is going to go into recession. There are some great fears being expressed by many that the tariffs will result in a US recession. I don't think so. First of all, the tariffs that people refer to, the historic tariffs, are Smoot-Hawley in 1930. The Smoot-Hawley tariff was effectively an 80% tariff on all imports. This time it's 10%. And if you look at the effective new tariff rates, it's around 20%. So it's nowhere near the Smoot-Hawley situation. It's not going to cause a recession. And I think the US is aiming, as you said, Clause 4, to try and get reciprocal tariff reductions from key trading partners other than China. I think China, the US isn't going to negotiate much on because the trade imbalance with China is too large. With Canada and Mexico, it's quite interesting.
All right.
They have large deficits, but they haven't increased the tariffs any further beyond the initial 25%, and the USMCA exemptions continue to apply. So I think for most countries, it makes no sense to retaliate with countervailing tariffs. For instance, for Canada, 77% of their exports go to the US. If Canada retaliates, it's foolish. And now they've given a little bit of a carrot by not increasing
that's precisely what they've done.
So, yeah.
That's
now
precisely what
essentially
they've done,
now
Mr.
going to happen
Basu.
is
When we began
a
this
lot of
bulletin,
countries, including
there was
India,
a news flash which Canada is saying that it will now impose 25% tariff on some United States imports. So Canada has already started retaliating here. Your consensus, your
because they
opinion
have an
clearly is
election.
it's a foolish
You see,
measure.
it's a foolish measure because they have an election coming up.
That's a very important point.
Mark Carney has to appear
That's
tough.
a very important
He has
point,
to
and they've
appear
clearly
tougher than Poilievre, the
absolutely,
conservative.
absolutely.
And so
Thankfully,
he did.
absolutely. Point. Let me. Okay, let me continue. Vikram Limsay, let me invert this argument at this point. What Mr. Basu said, that the objective of the United States is increase India's import bill. Should we then look at perhaps actively pursuing free trade agreements and prioritizing or at least boosting our bilateral trade relations with other countries such as the United Kingdom, the European Union, Australia, or even the Middle East, so as to ensure that there is a buffer created from further such tariff shocks coming in from the United States?
So Ritangshu, that's what is happening either way. It is with the United States declaring these tariff tsunami or not. India is anyway pursuing bilaterals with almost every other nation in the country, including the South Pacific Islands also. See, what's actually happening over here is that this is, in my view, going to be turning out to be a kind of a Y2K movement for India. You know, we should just, like how Tendulkar leaves a short pitch rising outside the off-stump ball and wait for the next ball. That's the way we should be treating this, after tomorrow. Because quite honestly, this seems to be a game of hit and misses. It's more towards, let's say, manufacturing, internal domestic manufacturing of the United States is not going to be impacted so much by tariff because it's more related to, other economic parameters. Automobiles, for example, we were talking about that. You know what? This whole thing about Detroit and automobile capacity and all that, hey, listen, automobiles is now shifting from basically automobile and manufacturing and large heavy engineering manufacturing is all about a ecosystem approach. You don't just produce a car. There's a whole ecosystem. There's a geographical ecosystem. There's a financial ecosystem. There's a component ecosystem. So just by saying that, we'll, tariff and suddenly the car production will go up, it's not going to happen because the world is moving away from ICE to EV to autonomous. So now, when you move from ICE to EV to autonomous, the number of components in a EV are almost 40 or 50% lesser than what is employed in ICE. So what are you going to do? Are you going to go back to, a Dino era where again you're going to ICE engines? The world is moving on. I mean, look at what's happening with BID. Everywhere, look at the automobile production data. EVs are now taking over. Your entire the Detroit lobby is still stuck in the ICE past. Now, well, good for them if they want to create some capacity and do some domestic manufacture. But, somewhere down the line, the consumer is, going to realize that, hey, I've got a lemon. Similarly, look at what, what's the biggest import of, basically the biggest services import of the United States today is a cheap holiday. Abroad. I mean, if you look at their services breakup, export is financial services, but import is cheap holidays, which is categorized as personal travel. Again, it comes back to the dollar at the end of the day, because it's all right to have a cheap holiday in Asia, but if that dollar is going to, render your manufacturing capacity or manufacturing ability questionable, then you really need to work on your currency and not your tariff. So it's going to be a whole lot of hits and misses. Harley Davidsons and a couple of bourbon whiskey caskets over there, it's not going to make much of a material difference to any trade this thing. Yes, we're going to have bilateral relationships with almost every country. Even within EU, there's a FTA which is pending for the last 10, 15 years. They're not going to get their act together, but we are going ahead and having our bilateral relationship with each country, even Africa, South Asia, BIMSTEC, today the PM is over there. So yes, bilaterals is the way to go, not painting the entire country. And they have to stop exporting inflation to the world. And China has to stop, therefore, exporting capacity. These are the two biggest export commodities in the world today, American inflation and Chinese capacity. So that's where those guys are going to play. We should just leave the ball, as I said, outside the off stump, rising, and wait for the next ball. And that's what's going to happen for India.
Well, to carry the cricket metaphor forward, Patikit Pen, leaving the ball offside means that you are certain that it's going to be a fast bowler bowling up and he's not going to switch to spin suddenly mid-delivery or mid-over. The problem is that we have talked so far about policies taking into account a stable government and a fixed policy. We have to bring in the Trump coefficient here. For instance, even of something as basic as to the tariff, there has been a bit of debate today as to whether it's actually 26%, as was announced in the press conference, or 27% that came in the White House documentation here. So that's the level of unpredictability, particularly that we're dealing with the Trump administration. You mentioned that there is no way India is going to allow him, or he's going to be fooled in even thinking that India is going to allow him access to the dairy and poultry products. The question is, this is Trump. He acts out of the box. He takes delight in acting out of the box. How much can we take him for granted, and to what extent do we need to have that as a buffer as we decide to play this ball, or do we decide to leave it?
Well, Ritangshu, I mean, we are not taking Trump for granted. I think the government has reacted maturely. I think the predictability part of Trump is this, that he is concerned about reducing the trade deficit. Now, if you want to reduce the trade deficit, there is enough room for India to increase its oil imports, CNG, LNG import, or even say India is on the cusp of increasing its imports of modular reactors. Our aviation sector is booming. There's a large opportunity for aircraft imports. A large number of orders have been given by Air India. So there are opportunities for reducing the trade deficit if that is a concern. But if the American industry says that, look, your Atmanirbhar Bharat is a problem for me, your subsidizing of the agriculture is a problem for me, your GST is a problem for me, then that is not acceptable, because for India the food security is a very important part. For India to create resilient supply chain within the country and to ensure that we don't miss the manufacturing bust all over again, it is important for us, and that is a policy decision government has taken. And the reason is very, very clear. The disruptions during the COVID time showed that eventually India has to create a base within the country for supply chains, and eventually if the jobs have to be created, service sector has its own limitation. So weaponization of tariff has a shock wave, but it has a limited shelf life. Eventually, it is very clear that they want negotiations to happen. And I think India is very clear on it that, look, you want to reduce the trade deficit, we will do it. But don't tell us that we must open the dairy sector, because it's a very politically sensitive sector. Prime Minister Modi, at the end of the day, is accountable to the electorate, to the people of India, not to people of United States. We respect America for what Trump wants to do in terms of ensuring that they become great again. I mean, I do respect that country. But to say that, look, I have a problem with your policies, that is not going to happen. I mean, the statement is very simple. You think what you want to do about your country is good, go ahead, do it. You have done it. But don't tell me what I should do about our structural reforms, about my initiative of Make in India, or my subsidizing for food security, because I have to, at the end of the day, feed 150 crore people, and to ensure, and we ensured during the COVID time that more 80 crore plus people got additional food ration, and because of this, there is not a single incident of anybody dying of starvation, in spite of so many challenges India faced. And even then, India became the 5th largest economy. So I think the predictable part is this: they have a problem with trade deficit, but whether we will open this sector or that sector, that is not something Trump administration will decide for us. Secondly, Trump is opening up the avenue for and telling you, look, this is the way US is going to react. So you better literally go and have trade with other trading blocs, and you realign your supply chains. I think that is where BRICS is going to get strengthened. BIMSTEC will have more opportunities. At the end of the day, I reiterate what I stated. We are not an export-oriented, US-dependent economy. So there's no obsession beyond the point to actually have to export to the United States. You see the overtures by the Chinese and the European Union. They're all feeling jitters. At the end of the day, Ritangshu, you impose tariff on everybody. You can't manufacture everything within your own country. You have to import from somebody, na. So eventually it would pinch. It may not have a recession or a hyperinflation in the United States, but it does increase the cost within the United States. Whether the electorate of the United States will accept it or not, it's for the Americans to decide. But I think government of India is very clear where to draw the line, and that's why there are reactions, but the government is very clear. In 2018, they put similar reciprocal tariff. India waited, did not open the dairy sector, and imposed reciprocal tariff on the American steel aluminum as well. Please remember what happened in 2018. There were pressure on India for CAATSA. Do not take S-400 from Russia. We went ahead, took S-400 from Russia, and we did not have sanctions on us in spite of that. So I think Indian government knows how to actually negotiate with the Americans, and we have to respect the government. I think we've got a very clear. I think we are only going to be far more resilient. Vikramji mentioned very rightly that it probably is the right.
I think we've got a very clear and a very and a very firm logic and reason-based reassuring picture so far from my guest. Dr. Mehta, I'll come to you for the last word. And forgive me if this may sound a bit infantile, but I'm going to represent my viewer and come up with two questions which my viewer will have, perhaps someone who does not understand the world of tariffs that much as you gentlemen is. Number one, the key concern which my viewer has is, number one, what happens to the markets in the short term, given the fact that they have been on a largely disturbing free fall over the past 6 months? Number two, what happens to the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar, because we have established that impacts the common man in multiple ways. How would you address these two immediate concerns?
Address both these concerns. First and foremost, this is not going to have a major impact on the Indian economy. This is, while it is a disruption, we have to use this as a way to carry on with our fundamental economic reforms. The cricket analogy that was made, if we have a strong IPL and a strong Ranji team, nothing can distract us from the future. So the focus has to be on making sure that we understand that these balls will come. We need to know which one to take and which one to miss. So we need to focus on improving our domestic competitiveness is the first point. The second point, clearly, the rupee depreciated because the rupee needs to depreciate. It was overvalued. This is something we should not be worried on. Inflation, given the fact that oil prices are trending down, and this is one of the main reasons Trump chose this time. This is no coincidence. One, Trump has said drill baby drill, which means oil prices will come down, which is what the US consumer cares about the most. So any impact of inflation will be least at this point in time.
Okay.
The same will happen in India. So I think if this had to happen, this is as good a time as any. We should use this as an opportunity to accelerate our economic reforms. And I think equally importantly, we have to understand that if we want our country to grow, we will have to support domestic Indian industry, which means buy Indian wherever possible, support Indian deep tech, support new Indian initiatives which are focused on this. It may take some time, but eventually if our products are good, doesn't matter what the tariffs are, the world will buy much more of our products.
All right. I think we can end it on that. I think our viewers can take heart from the fact that while they may probably have read it in today's newspapers and panicked about the 26% headline, I think today we have gone way beyond tariffs and had a very nuanced discussion about the fact there is no need to panic. We are on a steady course and there is a lot of opportunity to be gained rather than panicking from it. Thank you so much, Dr. Sudhir Mehta, Mr. P.K. Basu, Pathikrit Pen and Vikram Limsay for joining me on a very, very educative discussion here. It's time for a short commercial. News and updates continue on Mira now. Stay tuned.